Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Katie, a member of the CK12 team, and my colleague Laramie and I will be running today's webinar on Common Core Math on CK12. We're so glad you've joined us. We've had a great first week and second week of our 2018 Certified Educator Program. Given this is the second to last day of the program, we'll go back there for a second. Given this is the second to last day of the program, hopefully you all are experts at navigating the CEP Google class to find assignments and resources, and at using Zoom features such as Q&A to ask the CK12 team questions, and chat to network with other educators. Please remember to post questions for us in the Q&A window so we can make sure that we get to everyone's questions. With that, let's get started with today's content. So as we said, today's session is called Common Core Math on CK12. Specifically during this webinar, we'll be covering the following topics. Adding interactivity in Plix, so including both the full Plix that we have as well as custom embedded interactives found directly within the text of CK12 Flexbooks. Then we'll actually talk about those Flexbooks, both accessing and exploring the new Algebra I, Algebra II, and Geometry books, and then the upcoming middle school math Flexbooks. And finally, we'll talk about strategies for using our Common Core State Standard interactive Flexbooks. This includes teaching guides and then the strategies for incorporating them both outside and during class time. Before we get into the content, just a reminder that our core information for this session, like other sessions, can be found in the session resource page. That is posted in the matching topic in the CEP Google class, and we're going to post that in the chat window as well. You can print these before a session begins or use it as a reference when completing the assignment or working with the CCSS Flexbooks this coming year. We also want to find out if any of you have explored our books so far and what you are looking for in a Common Core Flexbook. You'll see a poll here in a few seconds that's going to prompt you to respond to 2 short questions. So the first is, have you explored any CK12 Flexbooks with embedded interactives? Your choices are that you already used the Algebra I or Geometry book that have been live for a little bit. You've seen but not fully explored the new CCSS Flexbooks. You've not previously seen these books. And then what are you looking for in a Common Core State Standard Flexbook? Are you looking for that interactivity, guided discovery, examples, practice, other? If there's something specific, please note it in the chat window. And feel free to choose multiple options for that second question. I'm going to pause for a few seconds to let you finish answering the poll. Looks like we're about 3/4 of the way there, getting there. So I'll give you just a little bit longer to do that. Okay, we're almost there. I'll give you guys another few seconds to kind of wrap up. I know there's multiple choices for that second question, so I want to make sure that you have a chance to answer all of those. And I think probably wrap it up there and share those results with you. So it looks like the majority of you have started to see, but definitely haven't explored. Only a few of you have actually used our existing books that have been live on the site. And many of you have not seen these at all, so this will be a great introduction for you. And hopefully those that have started to see them will get some more information about what's there and then our upcoming books as well. And it definitely looks like that interactivity, given that we're launching these as interactive books, is the key piece in there, as well as kind of all the other components in terms of guided discovery and examples of practice as well. So from there, we're going to close those results, and I am going to move forward and talk about what's in our books. So CK12's Plix, and hopefully you guys have seen these externally, that stands for Play, Learn, Interact, and Explore, are now included directly within the text. These Plix include descriptions, links to related reads, well, in this case, it would be kind of that read that you're working off of, interactive frames, and challenge questions. And those challenge questions build to higher level thinking and open discussion. So these Plix, you can see kind of in that picture on the right, are embedded directly within the book, so you don't have to go find the matching Plix in our browse option, which is ck12.org/Plix, but you can actually just access them directly from these texts. So you'll start seeing those both within these books as well as some of our other books that have previously hyperlinked to our Plix. In addition to links to those full clicks within the text, you're going to see simple interactions. These include options to adjust content, drag and drop answer choices, and explore graphs. So you can kind of see the choices on the left. As you work your way, there are different abilities to kind of adjust to learn more about square roots, a graph that allows you to pull image shapes within there, and then kind of a matching formula piece. And all of those are directly in the line of the text. You can kind of see on the first two that there's text right above it and below it. So instead of having a separate set of directions and questions related to the clicks, these are related and tied directly into the text and the flow of learning within that particular page. So the interactives, as well as our embedded clicks, can be found in our new Common Core Interactive Flexbox. And I'm going to just pause here and say, for all of you out there that don't use Common Core because your state has decided they're not going to do that, that's something that you could take these books, you can delete the CCSS off of them, and you can then just use the interactivity and exploratory learning, because that's really the heart of these books versus the like actual alignment to this exact standard that falls under Common Core versus a state standard that might be almost identical from there. So there are two ways to access these interactive Flexbooks. The first is to browse, well, there's kind of two ways to browse to them. First, by a particular branch. So for example, in our Algebra branch, our Algebra I book has been live for a little bit, so you'll see that in there. In the Geometry branch, you'll see those. As we wrap up the rest of kind of Algebra II and move into middle school math, you'll start seeing those in the appropriate branches as well. We also put the option to directly access all of our Common Core books as we launch them, as well as the matching teaching guides using the footer option that says Common Core Math. That's kind of a quick link to see just that set of resources in one place. And then you can go to the direct link ck12.org/books/standards/CCSS. So those are all different ways of accessing these new interactive books. So as I said, these new books were designed with the Common Core philosophy in mind. Not only are they correlated to those standards, but they include the combination of active learning, interactives, example, and review. As I said, we have our algebra books and our geometry book live. We are building our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade books, and those will be rolling out after that. And we've included teaching guides for each book, which we'll talk about kind of more when we talk about strategies and using these books. So with that, I am going to turn this over. You can access those, just kind of always a reminder, using our main page or opening them in the app or the offline reader. But you do need to access them through a browser first because that interactivity isn't 100% happy with the offline reader at this time. So I'm going to switch this over to Laramie. He's going to steal this screen and walk you through some of these books.
Thanks, Katie. This is Laramie, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some specifics regarding our CCSS content that is brand new for us at CK12. One big thing I want to definitely sort of highlight that Katie pointed out is that I've worked with a number of teachers already who said that they weren't really interested in CCSS because for district purposes or school purposes or personal purposes, they were not particularly interested in pushing the kind of sort of thinking that's involved with following a certain set of standards letter for letter. The Common Core books, in fact, I had a pretty long discussion with a number of my teammates here about whether we should release the same book under 2 different titles. Because the Common Core books are not just about following the standards, although they do follow it, that they have specific content written for every individual standard along the way. That's not the only neat design about these books. The biggest fun thing, the biggest important thing about these books is that they follow the Common Core philosophy of Socratic, experiential, hands-on learning that many, many students do very well with and often don't get access to, particularly in math classes. So the biggest thing that I would really like to make sure everybody gets a chance to understand is that you do not have to know anything about Common Core, have any interest in Common Core to really make a good use of these books. So with that said, let me take over the screen here. And I'm going to start from the CK12 homepage. This CK12.org, and there are 2 different ways to get to these books so that you can see sort of the 2 easiest methods of finding what you're looking for. As Katie pointed out, you can go through the browse page. This is our common way to find a Flexbook textbook. Pick a subject, click on Flexbooks. In this case, we're looking for high school content. And then you'll see, for instance, the Interactive Algebra I for CCSS down here, and the separate teacher edition. They are actually 2 different books. one for the student and one for the teacher. The teacher's edition is a guide to implementing the student book. It's not actually the same text at all. And we'll go over that a little bit later in our discussion here today. But for the first part, we're going to talk about the student edition and what the new additions to that are. And if we go back to the home page, really almost any page on the CK12 site, the easiest way I think to get to these books is to scroll to the bottom of it, pretty much any page, look for that By CK12 banner, and directly into that we have Common Core Math. So if you click on Common Core Math there, oops, I clicked twice accidentally, you'll go to our Common Core Math Flexbox dedicated page, and you'll see the 3 high school books that have already been released and the 3 associated teacher's guides for those books. I will also be talking a little bit about our middle school math books that are currently in production. They're not yet on this page because they haven't been released yet, but progress is definitely coming along on those. We're hoping to have a significant amount of content for that to be available this fall, and certainly throughout the year they'll be completed. So our goal is to make them quite usable for teachers that want to take advantage of that curriculum this fall. So that's the easiest way to find the content. Let's start from there, and I'll show you what's involved with these books and why they're so exciting. First we're going to look at here is the Algebra I book. You'll see it's organized like much of our other Flex books, just into individual chapters and individual lessons. But the individual lessons then specifically include a huge amount of interactivity and deep critical thinking questions that require the student to actually understand the content, not just understand how to answer a specific question or two. There's many sections in all 3 of these books that we titled Active Learning. And the reason we called it that was to try and get across the idea that the questions themselves are the instruction. They are the learning. They're very formative. They're not summative questions. The idea isn't to test and see if the students already understand the material, but to get them to try and use productive failure to get through the understanding of why something works the way it does. Much of these books is written around that philosophy. And you'll see that right here from the very beginning, we have interactivity that's built into the lesson. Here's one of our Plixes. You click on this, it opens up into a separate window and has the questions that go along with an interactive, but that Plix was chosen specifically to support the content here in this lesson. I'm going to show you, here we go, here's one of our new embedded interactives. These actually were written specifically for the purpose of the lesson. So the questions above and below this interactive directly relate to what the student is doing using this interactive and showing them the mechanics of whatever that particular topic is. In this case, I think it was slope of a line. So they can adjust the slope by dragging the point here, adjust the y-intercept, and they can see immediately the changes to the equation to the function that describes that line. And I wanted to show you another example from our algebra book. There we go. We also have a number of embedded questions. They are actually very much like our adaptive practice questions, but they're actually built into the lesson. So the student doesn't have to leave the lesson itself to go somewhere else. They can actually answer the questions on the spot as they're reading. And it, again, gives a lot of that formative assessment comment or concept to get the students to understand why something is correct and why it is not, so they can keep doing the same question again and again until they get it right and understand what the answer is supposed to be. Another one of the big advantages of these lessons is that the Plixes, the embedded interactives, are often, they often build on each other. This is one of my favorite lessons here from the Algebra I book, 311, where we start off with a basic interactive that shows the correlation between a linear equation and a quadratic equation, and you can adjust where the 2 equations meet so that you can see that it's talking about 2 boats that are racing each other. One has a specific speed and the other accelerates over time, and you adjust how long it takes them to meet and then see how far each one goes in that time period. And then as the lesson moves on, you get more and more interactivity with the same format, with the same interactive. Here you can still adjust the same time, but then you can also adjust the lead that one boat has over the other at the start. And then in the third interactive, they get even more interactivity for the same material, so that they are building on their knowledge as time moves on. And I think that's a very important aspect of Common Core and with experiential learning in general. So now I want to show you a couple of similar examples from our geometry book. And actually what I'm going to do here first is go back to our home page. Again, scroll down to the bottom of the page. Common Core Math. We'll go into Interactive Geometry for CCSS. And here's that geometry book. This was based on the CK12 Advanced Geometry, which was written specifically for Common Core with that same experiential thinking in mind. And then we went back in and made a number of changes. We added in interactivity, which I'll show you. And then we also added in specific questions at the end of every lesson that really focus on that deep higher order thinking. You'll see many of the questions are describe why this is, explain your choices, all throughout the book. And there are, in the teacher's edition, which I'll show you in a little bit, there are specific example answers for that so that you know as a teacher the kind of thing you're looking for to really know that the student understood the topic. Oops, wrong button there, sorry about that. If we scroll back up here a little bit, you can see that in the geometry we have many interactives that are based on geometric figures, showing them how many different, what kinds of, in this case, transformations there are, showing whether or not something is a rigid transformation because it just changes position and not shape. Lots of real focus on the topics involved. And then we also have embedded videos in these lessons. Most of the other CCSS books don't focus on video, but the geometry book in particular has a number of them because I think it's very useful in that instance. And then finally, I want to show you a couple examples from the Algebra II book. Again, you can access it from that footer. One of the new things with the Algebra II, and it's also just coming into the geometry book, is the idea of warm-ups. The warm-ups are new interactives that are based on interactives from a previous lesson. So it's sort of a reminder of the prerequisite for the lesson that they're starting. And the lesson starts right off with it. It starts right off with something the student is supposed to do, so they're not just reading. Many of them have some kind of response interactivity to let them know whether they're doing something right or wrong, what they're looking for as they're making changes to the interactivity. But it reminds them of, again, the prerequisite content before they move on into the further development of the lesson. Lots of specific interactives that were written for the content in Algebra II. And the Algebra II in particular has a lot of those active learning types of questions where the student is expected to have one example of the kind of question they're working for that's labeled example, and then either before or after that, an active learning question where the answer isn't specifically given in the text, although it's definitely strongly hinted because it's supposed to be formative. But the answer isn't specifically given in the text for the student because we want them to actually go through and work it out and understand how things are intended to follow through. And then finally, I wanted to show you an example of one of our interactives. This one's also in Algebra II, where there's a random component to the questions so that as the students are learning, in this case, rational equations and how they work, how to solve them, every time they restart, they get a new random equation that's similar format but different numbers. And you'll find that this is becoming more and more common as our new books move out to incorporate this sort of changing content that's very similar, but that every student doesn't have exactly the same thing, so that they can help each other out without specifically giving each other the answers to things. So I think that's the general gist of all the new content in our student editions. If there's any questions, Katie, that I can respond to, I'd be happy to do that.
So we had a couple people asking about the timeline for release for the middle school math book. So if you could talk about that, as well as if all 6 of those books that we're working on are going to be part of that Flexbox 2.0 release in August.
So the middle school math books are indeed, like I said, under construction right now. I would say overall we're about 30% done. We've been starting from the front of the book and moving toward the back, incorporating all the content along the way so that there will be parts of the books that are usable right away and that content will be continuing to fill in over time. I am definitely expecting sort of beta versions of those books to be available by the end of August so that you can see where we're going with it and get a chance to start using the content as time moves on through the school year. As far as the Flexbox 2.0 release, the sort of interactive books and the new view of our books, the high school books will definitely be among the first books released in that. The middle school books will also be part of that as they are completed.
Thanks, Laramie. With that idea of kind of like high school and middle school, are these CCSS books written for @grade or are they more geared for advanced learning?
It's a good question. I think a lot of times that depends on the classroom, but I would say that our Algebra I is challenging It requires the students to really get their hands dirty and understand the topic. The geometry, I would say, is pretty much at grade. The Algebra II is pretty much at grade. So if anything, you might want to use some of the included resources in the teacher's guide for Algebra to sort of scale down some of the content. But I think most of it is definitely accessible to most students. It just may require a little more time in.
Thanks. And then we have a question about GeoGebra specifically. So you were demoing some GeoGebra interactives, and someone asked about getting permission for them to use that. So I know we had conversations about that. If you could maybe clarify.
GeoGebra is definitely open source, and all of the interactives that we have used GeoGebra for were written by our team. So all of those are definitely available for your use, along with everything else in CK12. It is open source. It's available for students to, to further the cause of education. So yes, absolutely, we do have permission to use those. We wrote them ourselves.
So I have one more question kind of about the Plix interactives, and that's if you can just clarify the difference between Plix, the actual Plix that's embedded, and the interactives that you put within your text.
Another great question, thank you. An example of the embedded interactives is like right here, where we have questions in a text above and below the interactive. And sometimes, particularly in our newer ones, there will be questions embedded in the actual interactive itself. However, Plix, an embedded Plix, actually takes you to a different page. And I know we have a number of those in the geometry, for instance. When you click on an embedded Plix, what you know is that that Plix was specifically chosen from our existing library of interactives to correlate directly with the content in the read, but it's not really a bespoke interactive. It's not really designed for the purpose of being in that lesson. It just directly relates to the content. And when you click on that link, it opens a separate page, as you can see here, of the Plix, shows the interactives, and then has specific questions that the students are expected to answer. Now, the nice thing about the Plix specifically is that they are individually assignable. So you can assign a read to a student and then know whether or not they've essentially opened the read and taken a look at it. But you can also individually assign Plix and then know whether they've done the Plix in addition to just looking at the read. They've also answered the questions in the Plix. So that's kind of a nice benefit. And on that note, the one other thing I should have mentioned earlier, I didn't do a good job of, was you'll see more as we use the teacher's guide, that one of the things we've incorporated here is the idea of our adaptive practice primarily as a homework tool. So you can assign a student a read, like for instance this 3 dimensions read, expect them to go through and learn the material using the interactives, using the Plix, watching the videos, and then assign them the practice individually, and then know as a teacher when they've done each of those different components. You can know when they read the read, and you can know when they've used our online adaptive practice that does all its own grading and gives you a submitted report that talks about what questions they answered, how long they spent, what answers they gave if their answers weren't correct. So you really get a good top-down view of what students are doing for homework without having to specifically put together something that you know goes along with the lesson that you taught that day. And that's available for any of our books, of course.
Thanks. And then we have a question about kind of the curriculum as a whole. So someone said it appears to be similar to Engage New York, without the online interactives. Are our interactive books written at the same level of rigor and depth and intended to be like an all-inclusive curriculum?
Absolutely. In particular, you'll find that the new middle school math books that are coming out will definitely represent similar content that you would see Engage New York, Illustrated Mathematics, some of the other well-known Common Core resources. The difference, as you've already pointed out, being that we very deeply incorporated interactivity into all of the lessons. We tried to take a very, very rigorous, very detailed approach to all of the standards, making sure that everything that we included not only addressed everything in the standard, but also addressed the spirit of the standard. And then went through and tried to show that the students tried to show the students that there were ways to understand that weren't just walls of text, that weren't just reading about everything. They were getting your hands dirty and understanding why you're doing what you're doing. So absolutely, they are very rigorous. They do definitely they will very much look like Engage New York or Illustrated Mathematics, I think.
Okay, I have one more question for you, and then I think we're going to move on to maybe the teaching guides and strategies in that piece, and then we'll continue to answer these questions as we work from there. The question is about using Desmos as an interactive. Have we used any Desmos as an interactive within our content?
Desmos can be embedded using our embedding tool in the lead customization, and we have other other webinars that talk about that, recorded ones as well if you want to look back into it. But none of our books actually incorporate the Desmos calculator directly as far as the ones that we've designed. We play with it a little bit, but we had trouble sort of narrowing the focus down to what we wanted to make sure the students were targeting on by using that. So that's kind of where we settled on the GeoGebra. There's even a couple places where we designed a GeoGebra interactive to essentially emulate the Desmos graphing calculator because it allowed us to do a little better job of limiting what the students were seeing. So yes, that can be done. No, we haven't used it much.
Great, thanks, Laramie. I think I'm going to swap back and steal this screen again for a minute. And then we'll let you continue to share after we go through a little bit of some strategies. So I just want to pull this up here, and then Laramie is going to go through these, but talk about our teaching guides. We had some questions about, students using them, accessing them, all the rest of that. They are available as well right now, kind of across the board, but they're not kind of just, they're not a book that's the same book with a teacher piece in there. They're really, as Laramie was saying, separate books. They have piecing guides and standards and learning outcomes and additional resources and kind of notes on how to teach that. So if a student was learning on their own, they might be great resources. If they're using their book in class, they're not going to necessarily need to access this for any particular reason in there, but they would have access if they were learning on their own. And so I'll let Laramie go through that in a second, but I want to talk about some teaching strategies as well. So really different ways to use these books. This is true for kind of a variety of modalities on our site, but we wanted to pull a couple ones specifically for our Flexbox together for you. So the first two would be kind of that in class and then the assignment. So you could have students do a self-exploration of this topic because it has that embedded interactivity and ability to learn and read the text and then actually work through. If they're working on an interactive, they could share the state of an interactive with a neighbor, and they could compare and say, okay, well, you got this, I got this. Or the examples Laramie was showing that have kind of those different numbers, like what's similar about these two, even though I'm working with different problems, and kind of compare them. And then you could use an active learning problem or those new warm-up interactives in there as an introduction to a particular topic. And then as Laramie was showing, kind of assigning the actual section for homework or assigning the matching practice, or for the embedded full Plix, you can assign those separately as well. And then we have some other options. So an idea would be to have students build their own GeoGebra interactive that you can include in your customized Flexbook. So if you're trying to kind of build those pieces that you work with and tailor stuff, if you change it up and you want a different interactive, challenge your students to work with GeoGebra to do that. Our highlighting and note-taking feature still works within CK12. If you're using an LMS, those are not necessarily available in that place, but if you're accessing anything directly on CK12, those annotation tools will help you focus on key ideas. And then kind of the mix of examples in active learning really helps students explore at their own level. And if you have questions on that, you can always create customized books or assign different sections to different students, and the adaptive practice will help differentiate as well. So with that, I'm going to let Laramie steal the screen back and continue to kind of work his way through demoing those teaching guides and those other pieces.
Great, thanks, Katie. Let me grab the screen again here. All right, so we're going to start back over at the homepage. And again, I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. I'm going to choose Common Core Math under by CK12. And now you can see, obviously, in parallel to each of the student editions of those 3 high school books that we looked at, we have the teacher's guides for each one. And what I want to do is just kind of go through real quickly each of those guides and give you a feel for how they're laid out. Now, for those of you who've used the Flexbook editor at CK12, you know that it numbers chapters automatically. So one of the things that we did here was to put the overview of each sort of level of the guides at the end, so that the numbers of each of the chapters match the chapter in the student guide. So the first chapter is chapter 1 and so forth, instead of bumping it down and having everything be confusing. So often the first thing you'll want to do when you get to a level, in this case with the TOC, table of contents level of the teacher's guide, is look at the last section here. So that's what we're going to do, is take a look at the scope and sequence. And this section here talks about from sort of a bird's eye view of how to use the teacher's guide to support the student guide. It gives you reviews of what our terms are, the types of things that we have in our books, the difference between examples and active learning problems, for instance. Gives you a little bit of a description of what each of our modalities are, what reads are, interactives. It gives the description of the difference between an embedded interactive and a Plix interactive, like we talked about before. What the real-world applications are, how they can be used in the classroom, adaptive practice, custom quizzes. Really walks you through all the different parts of the lessons. And you'll see buried clear down here under chapter assessments, there's one little word that's linked. And this is the only link to the solutions for the chapter assessments. Now, CK12, we're not particularly focused on summative types of quizzes. We generally use questions more from a formative standpoint. So we haven't historically had a strong push toward creating tests for you to use as teachers, but we decided we'd try and give you something that was at least a little bit pre-formed from that standpoint. So there are chapter, or in some cases section assignments that talk about multiple different lessons all at once. And for those lessons, the only place to find the solutions is this one link halfway down through partway through the teacher's guide, where we assume most students are probably not going to get to anyway. They'd have to be pretty dedicated, I think, to read clear through how to use the teacher's guide to find that. You'll also find that there's some information directly to you on ways to use the different parts of the lessons here. And then down at the bottom is the scope and sequence for the whole book. And it gives you, again, that bird's eye view of how many chapters there are, sort of when the midterm comes along, how many instructional periods are involved with each chapter, what additional major content is involved in each chapter. So you really, again, can see overall what's involved with this particular class. There's a couple of ideas for midterm and final projects for the algebra here. We're going to talk a little more about this with the geometry book because it actually incorporates a huge midterm and final project. But the algebra book just has some more ideas for what kinds of projects you might use. So now the next thing I want to do is zoom in at a specific chapter level. So let's go back to the table of contents. Sorry, click on the book title here, back to the table of contents. We'll choose, say, chapter 2. And then again, at the end of the list of chapter 2 lessons, there are actually 6 sections in chapter 2 in the student book. You'll see the last one here is the scope and sequence. Now, we have a similar sort of a layout, this table layout of the content just in chapter 2. It looks kind of similar to the overall scope and sequence, but now it's just dedicated to the content in each of these lessons. And now from here, you can see all of the specific modalities that we believe support that lesson very clearly. And the solutions for supplemental exercises that were written specifically for you to give students in class, or if you like to send home as homework in addition to the adaptive practice. You'll see if we scroll down, here we go, under the adaptive practice quiz section here, most of these links are to the adaptive practice that supports the lesson. But every so often you'll see one of these labeled quiz. Those are the sort of section or chapter level quizzes that I was talking about, where you find the answers in the table of contents level part of the teacher's guide. Each of these links opens in a new page. This makes it easy for you to either assign these individually using the CK12 tool, or if you like Google Classroom, all of the links are directly here. You can check out the standard that's in focus. Your information as a teacher that you need to lay out this class and to get this class to your students is all supplied here in the table of contents area. There's also sort of a zoomed in section of the teaching duration for this chapter. Again, very similar to information that was in the book level. And then finally, let's take a look at the content for each individual lesson. So this goes along with the student book lesson 2.1 on number types. If I click on this, now I get a detailed description of what standards are in focus, a list of vocabulary to support the lesson, what the learning outcomes for that lesson are. If there's any of the mathematical practices that are in focus in this particular lesson, those are also listed. And then a step-by-step description of what you can do in the class in different instructional periods. Some of the lessons in the book are good for more than one instructional period. We're assuming 50 minutes per period. And this actually shows you specifically what you can do with the students, which interactives, which questions, which clicks to use for each different part, and then has links specifically to anything that's not directly included in the text. And finally, teaching notes that were written by the author as the lesson was being composed. These are notes to you as a teacher from the author specifically saying, when I wrote this question, when I described this interactive, when I built this, this project, my goal was to try and make sure the students understood this, that the students knew that this was important, that this always worked, that that didn't always work. So that as a teacher, you know exactly what the real intention of that is, not just what the questions supplied there were. So now let's take a look at the geometry version of this. I'm gonna go back to the home page, scroll down to the bottom, Common Core Math, Geometry Teacher's Guide. Again, laid out very similarly on the table of contents. Go down to the end here and you would see the teaching this course, which is the overall scope and sequence. But the two sections here that are different from the algebra are the midterm and final projects. In the geometry book, the midterm and final projects are huge. Huge. I think the final project is something like, I don't know, a total of 100 pages of content, if I remember right. It's built around an interior design layout that incorporates an immense amount of the content covered in the geometry book and then gives a practical purpose for it. Shows the students how these kinds of things are actually used in a real world situation and gets their hands dirty and lets them actually play with the project that makes use of these things. They're learning a lot about transformations in particular. So all of the details that you need to apply this in class are right here. You get handouts, you have additional resources as far as quizzes, additional content that describes parts of the project. All this information is available under the final project and under the midterm project in the Geometry Teacher's Guide table of contents. I'm going to do a quick look at the chapter pacing guides for geometry. You'll see that they're very similar. If we look at the chapter level one, again, we have that quick duration. Is this 1 period? Is this 2 periods? What additional resources go along with the read itself? A link directly to the read, and then to all the specific additional resources. Now, much of this information, by the way, will be available in a slightly different format when Flexbox 2.0 comes out, but you'll find in that case, all under the related content section, these are all the things that show up. These Flix Interactives, the adaptive practice quizzes, the study guides, all the things that are linked in your teacher's guide as recommended resources, those will be the things that show up as related content in the Flexbox 2.0. So you'll see it's very easy transition to that new resource. And then finally, let's take a quick look at the Algebra 2. Again, I'm going to scroll to the bottom of the page. Common Core Math, Algebra 2 Teacher's Guide. The Algebra 2 is slightly different from the other two, just in that there's a whole section, section 6 here, that's dedicated to advanced statistics, which isn't really incorporated in the standard pace for Algebra 2 in the Common Core, but we felt it was very important information to some students at least, so we wanted to make sure it was incorporated in the same book. But you'll find that all the resources you need to teach a standard Algebra 2 class are pretty much incorporated in chapters 1 through 5. And the layout for the teaching guide, again, very similar. All the same information, the teacher's notes, the resources, everything else is in there for you to run through this as a teacher. Check my notes here real quick and make sure there was anything else I missed. I think that was the main content. So if there's any other questions, I'll be happy to go over those. Oh, yes, that's a pretty big point here. Yes, so let's take a look at the middle school math. I'm actually going to stop sharing for just 1 second, switch screens, because I do want to show you some examples of our upcoming middle school math book. So just 1 moment here. Okay, so yes, this fall, middle school math will be coming out. The difference between the middle school math books and the high school math books is that the teacher's guide for the middle school math books is a little more of a classic teacher's version of the textbook. It has the same content in most cases as the middle school book, but it has lots of additional information for the teacher. The student version of each book is where the real magic happens. The student version takes all of the suggestions from the teacher's edition and makes them interactive for the students, so that all the students see is the engaging, fun, really in-depth learning part of the lesson. So for instance, this is the first lesson in the upcoming Middle School Math 7 book. You'll see it starts right out with titles that are fun for students. The teacher's book doesn't references these, but this isn't how it's described. So it's easy for you to find what you're teaching as an instructor, but the students don't need to know that. The lesson starts right off with an interactive that they use to help figure out ratios and understand what ratios are all about. Then there's questions that are actually embedded in the lesson that the students answer based on that information from the interactive. And there's all kinds of questions. There's discussion questions, there's select all questions, there's drag and drop questions, there's lots of variety in the questions that they give. And they're all built to be formative. They're all built to encourage that productive failure. We expect the students to get some of the questions wrong. When they do, there's feedback that says, oh, this is why that wasn't the correct answer. This is what you should be looking for to find the correct answer. And then they try it again and until they get the answers right and then move on. Every section in the lesson is interactive. Every new topic has a specifically designed interactive for that purpose and specifically designed questions that are meant to encourage the students to really understand the material as it comes up and understand from their own point of view how to make things work, not just take somebody's word for it. If you drag the wrong thing into a drag and drop interactive, it tells you immediately what you should be doing and why you should be doing it the way it is. It gives you immediate feedback on almost everything that's involved in these. So these are very well designed specifically for that age group, and I think are kind of a neat new direction for textbooks. They make the textbooks really alive. They allow the students to really get their hands dirty and get in on what's going on. In addition to every lesson has those built-in sort of formative questions, every lesson also has at the very end a lesson quiz that gives you as a teacher a quick overview of did they really understand the material. These can be assigned individually so that you can assign the read to the students and know when they've gone through the read, and then assign this separate quiz so that you know whether they understood the general the conceptual content for the book. Here's another example. This one is section 1.2, Middle School Math 7. You'll see here, this is one of the new interactions. This was just done yesterday, if I remember right. But this one here that talks about figuring out the difference in rates. So we have two different people's tanks that are draining over time. And you can see as time goes by, the difference between the amount of content in one tank and the amount of content in the other. So if the students can answer questions about unit rates, about comparing unit rates with fractions and decimals. First one is fractions, the second one is decimals, for instance. All the things you can basically follow along with your Common Core list of standards and say, yep, there's that one, yep, there's that one, yep, there's that one, going right through the book. Everything is touched on, everything is made interactive and exciting for the students. Lots of really deep thinking situations where the students have to really understand what's going on instead of just, how did I find this answer, but why is this answer what it is? And then here's one example from the Middle School Math 6 book. We have this one has an embedded Google map where they're under the ocean and looking at different kinds of coral, and there's questions about different ways they could organize the same coral to look at different ratios. How do you use ratios in baking? How do you use ratios in blocks? There's an interactive here that tracks right away as they drag blocks into these little color-coded boxes here, and then has a bunch of embedded questions actually in the interactive that the students answer, talking about the ratios that come up with these randomly generated numbers of blocks. So if I were to redo this interactive, there wouldn't be 3 red blocks and whatever that was, 4 green blocks or something here. The numbers will change each time so that they get a chance to play with those ratios and see them in person and not have to do the same thing over and over. So that's kind of the overview of the middle school. I think that it's a slightly different approach than the high school, but I think it's going to be very, very, very exciting, especially for students as they get in and see the interactivity and the excitement of actually doing all these things hands-on.
Thanks, Laramie. We had one person, and I think you may have covered this after they asked this question, but if you can just go back and show them the 2 different ways to access the teacher guides for these books at this point in time, that would be super helpful.
Sure. So again, if we go to the, oh, thank you. Sure, no problem, Katie. If we go to the homepage, again, my personal MO is just go to the bottom of the page, click on that Common Core Math, and there's all 6 books. And when the middle school math books are done, the first place they'll be listed is right here, and you'll just see those 3 books and that associated 3 teachers' guides for those underneath. The other way to find them is to, again, from the homepage, pick a topic, browse, choose Flexbox, in this case, high school, and you'll find that those interactive books are in the list of high school books. And the teacher's edition, by the way, right there underneath. It's a separate link, but it's with the same icon.
Thanks. We had some questions about practice and everything else from there. I'm going to see if I can answer a couple of them live, but if you can just pull up a section and we can walk through practice in a second, that would be helpful. So one is, where do we see the data that is collected from the practices? For example, they use Canvas as well. So your data is based on where you assign anything on CK12. So if you're assigning a section within CK12 and you are assigning it to students within the CK12 platform, you would see their student reports there. If you're assigning that within the Canvas environment or Schoology environment or to Google Classroom, you would see their reports there as well. Not as well. You would see the reports there. You would not see them on CK12. So whatever environment you're assigning within would be what you're looking for there. With that in mind, just remember that you need to assign each part individually at this point in time. So if you just pull up any section in any of the math books, I can show you kind of what that looks like. So you would need different pieces from there. You would need to kind of see the math section. It looks like you're showing something in front of there. So. Oh, no.
This is the math account.
Just any section that we want to see for a page. So if you just pull up a book that's tagged, I just want to show them kind of where that practice would be. I know you showed it briefly for 2 seconds. So for any of our content, at the top of the page, you'd see that yellow practice button. If you click on that, right now this person started working on it. I think this may be a student account. So we'll have him switch screens back to the teacher account and reshare that one so you can see the assign options there. But that data, as I was saying, you have to assign the read separately, the practice separately, the embedded clicks separately if you're looking for scores on each of those. The only one that gives you kind of a detailed score report is that practice, because that piece is the part that actually is sort of a learning, sort of an assessment tool. You're definitely not going from there in terms of understanding the different parts within that. Like it's not recording the pieces from there. It's not recording the actual score that they got on the Plix questions. It's more recording the actual just that they accessed it at this point in time. So I'm going to have you pick actually one of the new CCSS, maybe the algebra book, just so we can stick with that topic. So scroll all the way down to the bottom. Let's get a Common Core book open and pick a topic within there. We're now in a teacher edition. Up at the top right is our practice. And so there are 2 options. If you click kind of the select piece there, it should open 2 pieces. You have one option to preview and one option to assign. If you're assigning that practice, you'll see the student report. You can assign it from CK12 to CK12 or to Google Classroom. If you're using Canvas or Schoology, you would need to do it in that environment. Now, if we can click on the preview for 1 second, you could see what that practice looked like to preview it. And if you start practicing and then you actually just stop for now, it will bump you to the basic practice screen. And we had someone asking about downloading these practice as a worksheet. And so right there, you could access the download option for that particular practice as you go in. So hopefully I've answered where you see stuff, what you're doing. We have kind of one question for you that I'm going to let you answer in terms of teacher guides as well as solutions to assessments. So maybe you could talk about a little bit about the difference between the questions within text and access to answers and our digital practice and that piece.
Okay, so the adaptive practice is available for almost any read on CK12. When a student does the adaptive practice, they get the questions there on the spot, they get the answer there on the spot, and then you get a report if it was assigned to them as a teacher showing when they've completed 10 questions correctly. You can also see the answers that they gave and how much time they spent while they were working on it. In the teacher's guides for the new CCSS books, there is an additional function for many of the lessons where A, they may have questions that are actually written in the text that the students will answer on paper if you assign them that way, or B, there are additional downloadable resources. I'm going to go to the teacher's guide for the algebra here real quick. Additional downloadable supplemental questions for each lesson that were written by that author. So here's the chapter level, the scope and sequence, so that last lesson here, supplemental exercises. And those supplemental exercises are printable. You can hand these out to the students as a worksheet, and then you have access as a teacher to the answers for those in that separate link just below it here, solutions. So every lesson then has these, they're sort of deeper thinking exercises. They're really good for scaffolding, getting more advanced students something to do that allows them to investigate the topic a little more deeply.
And then just kind of one other piece, you know, in talking about the score pieces, definitely check out our Getting Started with CK12 Assignments and Practice session. It's recorded. That will help you with that piece and kind of understanding these parts. Do you have any recommendations for some of those embedded interactives if the teacher wanted to kind of see how a student was doing on those? What could they do to kind of capture that without necessarily assigning it and seeing that in that regard?
That's a great question too. Something that I've done as an instructor is have the students take a screenshot. Both Mac and PC computers come with that option. In fact, almost every phone comes with that option as well. So if the students are accessing things on mobile, they can do it also. But what I've done is ask them to take a screenshot of the completed interactives. So if, for instance, let's go to one of the student lessons here real quick. If we go to any of the embedded interactives here, pick a lesson, any lesson. Hope it has just one of the regular interactives. Have the student complete the goals of the interactive. It'll say specifically what they're supposed to do, identify, check the right answer, whatever, and then specifically take a screenshot of just that interactive. And then you can have them post that using your Google Classroom, have them email it to you as a teacher, something to show you a picture of what they completed. There will be other options as time goes on through CK12, but in the meantime, I think that works very well, and I actually did use that myself with a couple of classes.
Thanks. And we have a question about students accessing based on devices. So students can read Flexbox on a small screen device, but what about the embedded Plix and interactive content? How does that work? Will that work on a phone? Will that not work on a phone? What does that look like?
Most of the interactivity in the math content on CK12 works across the devices. Most of the interactivity can indeed be accomplished on the phone. Much of it is not, much of the actual interactive parts of these books is not directly available in our offline reader at this point. Again, something else that we're expecting to be available in the future, but it's not available at this point. However, online, students can certainly read the reads. They can do almost all of the interactives. They can watch the videos. So yeah, almost all of this content is available for students regardless of the device they have. Tablet, phone, computer, doesn't matter.
Great. So it looks like we're out of questions and you've done your demo. I'm going to talk about a few wrap-up pieces at this point in time. I know it's before the hour mark, so we'll see, you know, how questions continue. But feel free to post questions in that Q&A as we wrap up the core piece of this, and we'll jump right back into questions as soon as I am done. So let me just share my screen for a second. I'm going to jump out of here. And we're going to talk about some pieces. So a lot of you guys were talking about kind of what happens if I'm working outside of CK12, if I'm in an LMS. Canvas got brought up a couple different times in questions today. If you want to learn more about that interactivity or apply to get that key to connect CK12 with Canvas, definitely check out our tools and apps page. Just like Laramie was showing you the Common Core link on the footer of our pages, the tools and apps link is there as well. Or you can go directly to ck12.org/tools and apps. And that gives you information about our 3 CK12 apps. So our Flexbox app, which allows for offline access, although as Laramie was saying, not all that interactivity works at this time. I think you need to, because we haven't finished that, the algebra, the CCSS books, you would need to open in a browser and then open in the app to kind of trigger them in there, because we're working on getting them in there as we speak. And then the practice app allows for students to access practice across devices. That does require connectivity because it is adaptive. And then we also have a Sims app for offline use for physics simulations at this time. And then all of the kind of information about our single sign-on options and integrated learning management systems is there as well. We are almost at the end of the summer program. We have this afternoon and one more day, which is super exciting. There are 2 core sessions left in our program. We have teaching strategies for using CK12 this afternoon, and then CK12 simulations and Plex interactives tomorrow morning as well. So if the exciting pieces when we were talking about brief teaching strategies for this were intriguing, then definitely join us this afternoon to learn about teaching strategies for using the full suite of CK12 resources. And then these little Plex interactives, we have an entire hour on kind of half on Plex interactives and half on our physics and chem sims. And that will show you more of that kind of full interactivity in a separate environment that's not directly within the text. So join us for those. The only other session that we still have coming up is actually a CK12 LMS breakout. So at 1 p.m. Pacific time today, we'll be doing an LMS breakout on CK12 and Canvas/Schoology. So if you are using Canvas or Schoology, that would be a great session to join, and we can answer all of your questions on that. We had a couple questions coming out about this Flexbox 2.0 piece. We have a recording of this on Monday. Our CTO actually came and did a live demo of that because that environment is not released at this point in time. And that recording is available in our Google Classroom. So you can definitely check that out and get a little bit more in-depth understanding of what that means and what that looks like. And as Laramie was saying, the math books that have been released will be released in that initial release for Common Core. And then as we roll out the middle school ones, they'll be added into that Flexbox 2.0 environment as well. We have, in addition to those last 3 sessions, the LMS breakout, teaching strategies, and our interactives, on Friday afternoon, we are hosting a series of live chats. So we had a lot of educators last summer asked to connect with other educators in their area or field, and we've set up a series of these. If you are curious which one you fit in, it is totally based on what you think fits best. So if you are in, not sure if you fit in the Mid-Atlantic or the Southern, or, I also homeschool, join as many of these as you would like to join. Lindsay's going to post all those links. There they are in the chat window. So you can use those links to directly join or use the links within the Google class to join, but we hope that you will join us on Friday for those. The other way to talk to educators is to use our Jumpstart Forum, so feel free to use that to network. We have some state-specific forums. If you are looking to add your state there, we really ask that you kind of get enough people engaged in a state-specific forum to warrant us adding that particular state. Having one person have their own state forum doesn't make a lot of sense. You do better to kind of stay in that main Jumpstart forum. So rally the troops, and if you want your own forum from there, then shoot us an email and we can talk about what that might look like. We have our session resource page. So this resource page is available in the Google class, and we'll post it in the chat window as well. I think Lindsay did earlier. And so you can access this to kind of get a quick refresher on the different topics we covered in today's session. And then for any of you looking for certification that need to do the assignment, you can find that assignment in our Google class. And it just really allows you to kind of find those Flexbooks, start customizing them, and then learn a little more about our interactives and Plex and think about using them. And finally, our feedback form. We always love to hear how we did and what we can do better as we continue to offer these webinars and trainings for teachers. So please feel free to fill that out. It's the same form for this entire program, and you can find it under the feedback topic, or we can post it in the chat window. So I think with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining us. I know we have at least one question coming in Q&A, so we're going to bump back over to questions in a second. But if you are all set and have no questions, you're more than welcome to go. If you need help from us in the future, please email jumpstart@ck12.org or support@ck12.org. And you can let your social networks know about CK12 using the hashtag CK12certified. So it looks like there's a question about kind of assigning practice to students. So does a student have to go back to each assignment to complete it, or if they open them directly from the lesson page, will it show up as completed in your report? So If they access, so for example, if they're accessing practice from the matching read page and you have assigned that practice, they don't have to go into the assignment thing to then come back to that page to access it. They can access it directly as long as you have assigned it and they access that matching practice and they click the turn in button so that they actually submit that homework, then you will see your report from there. So you are all set with that piece, but you do have to assign the practice and the read separately, and then you'll be able to see that part. So I think that's it for open questions right now. We are exactly at the hour mark, so if we don't have any more, we will wrap up here. Oh, and there's one question about the program. Will the resource pages stay available? Yes. So right now, we don't have plans to close the Google Class environment. They'll be available there for now. If at any point that we do close that environment, it will close it because we will have moved those resources to another place to make them available for you as well. And the question about Plix, if they access Plix, yeah, as long as you assign the Plix separately, if they access the embedded Plix from within the read, that you will still get the complete or incomplete mark for Plix. It is, but you do have to, you can't just assign the read. It doesn't automatically assign everything embedded within it. So you would need to separately assign that Plix. And I think that's it for questions. So with that, we'll say thanks for joining us. We hope you join us for one of the other sessions this afternoon or tomorrow. And we look forward to kind of certifying a good chunk of you guys this summer. Thanks so much.